Zelensky has claimed that Ukrainian forces are outkilling the Russians by a ratio of 6-1. This sounds preposterous, but it might just be grounded in reality. We're going to take a look at all that, plus Putin's strategy that frankly doesn't seem to mind these casualties. I'm going to break it all down. Let's get right into it. Okay, so this was interesting. It's an interview with Zelensky with the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he came out and said that Russian forces indeed have many more people. And he said, we care for our people more, which I think he's indicating that Ukraine is more guarded in when they take casualties. Because they will never have the same level of forces on the battlefield as the Russians. Zelensky said that before, Ukrainian forces were out killing the Russians by about 4-1, but now that is 6-1. And he cited Pokrovsk and Kharkiv. Now, here's the thing. What he's talking about is that in those two directions, Russia has been pursuing a very specific strategy, we'll call it. And that is that, for example, in Kharkiv, right, Russia attempted to reinvade essentially from the north, right? So Russia has been on offense, so to speak, trying to push the Ukrainians back. In turn, Ukrainian forces are increasingly focusing on casualties first. So while Ukrainian forces are being very, very deliberate with counterattacks, Russian forces are basically continually always charging at them. It's a little bit like a zombie movie. In fact, some Ukrainian soldiers in interviews kind of compare it to that, where there's always going to be these forces pushing at you. There are continual targets and they continually get taken out, but there's just another round coming at you the next day. The result is that Ukrainian forces remain in relatively defensible positions while the Russians leave defensible positions, exposing themselves to casualties. And the scale that this has happened is incredible. One report had an entire airborne brigade has supposedly been taken out just in Vovchansk, right? This one Russian, the largest city that's kind of caught up in this Russian non-offensive near Kharkiv. Pokrovsk, I believe, is near Chasiv Yar, a similar area where there's been a lot of fighting taking place. And again, the same story is playing out where you're seeing Russian forces going on offense, pushing really, really, really hard, and leaving secure areas, exposing themselves to fire, and the Ukrainians just punishing them for it. So again, when Ukraine is pivoted to this casualties first strategy, it unsurprisingly has inflicted more casualties. This is, again, in contrast to Putin's strategy. We're going to talk about the reality, whether or not Zelensky's full of it, and what Putin is focusing on. But if you want to see some of the footage that I'm talking about from this fighting, particularly, we just did a breakdown of some of the fighting in Vovchansk from the Russian perspective. That video is dropping tomorrow on Combat Vet News. We just redid the site. So there's new tiers, new benefits, right? It's the time to become a member. You guys know that when I make war content, it means that YouTube demonetizes a lot of my content and that sponsors do not want to touch me, right? It is... When I tell other YouTubers in other niches how few sponsors even reach out, they are shocked because they don't want to be a part of this. So that means that I don't need them because I have you guys. I depend on you guys to make sure that I can do this every single day, 7 days a week, right? So those members of Combat Vet News, specialist tier, you're going to get the members only videos, dropping twice a week, uncensored combat footage, deep dive analysis. It's an insight we can't get anywhere else. Lieutenant tier, you get that, plus access to weekly Q&A videos and the shout outs at the end of every video. Colonel tier, you guys get everything, and I appreciate you so much. The uncensored videos, the weekly Q&As, the shout outs, and the special recognition at the start or at the end of the videos in gold. So if you want to support me, any one of these tiers will do it. Link is in the description, or just go to combatvetnews.com. Okay, so let's talk about the casualties, the real estimates. This is what I thought was interesting. The U.S. estimate, and this is actually from 13 June 2024, right? And this was straight from Secretary Lloyd Austin discussing the security situation at a Brussels meeting, cited 350,000 Russians killed or wounded, right? So we can sort of tease out the reality using our trusty calculator, which you know that there is about a 3-to-1 wounded ratio. So for 3 wounded for every 1 casualties. So we know then that if we divide by 4, we get the actual total Russian casualties around 100,000, 87,000 killed, with another, what's that? Let's see, with another 260,000 wounded. A really tremendous number. And that's, I believe, Russian forces. I don't know if that includes things like the DPR and LPR, Wagner Group, and others. As you know, Wagner Group took about 20,000 killed and about 40,000 wounded just while they existed. But Wagner was always willing to fight in this, what's become the norm now, in this high casualty, high infantry attrition scenario, right? You could see the Ukrainians, though, they have their own estimates that skew pretty high, and they have an incentive to, right? The French actually have a much larger estimate with 350,000 wounded and 150,000 killed. Again, they're using the same 3-to-1 ratio, but a little higher. The UK also believes this is about in line with the French estimate, about 500,000 killed and wounded. Again, the U.S., I trust the U.S. estimate because we spend so much money infiltrating state actors that I think these stats are likely correct. Right? The U.S. estimate, I put the most faith in. The Ukrainians have an incentive to hype the numbers. Again, Ukrainians saying over 500,000 troops in Ukraine have been lost, which killed plus wounded, putting the Russian wounded total at like a little under 200,000, which seems within the realm of possibility, but seems also kind of unlikely. But here's the thing. Does Putin care? That's the real story. The answer is no. Putin doesn't care. Not just because he's a dictator who doesn't actually have free and fair elections, so doesn't have to answer to the people, but Putin doesn't care because this isn't a bug. It is a feature of his strategy, right? He is going to be charging these soldiers into Ukrainians. That is not an accidental outcome. That is the outcome that he seeks. He's going to throw more and more soldiers at the Ukrainians, literally run them out of bullets and people, even if it costs him. He's going to creepily advance anywhere he can, pushing his front lines further and further forward, regardless of the cost, right? He believes that eventually the West is going to abandon Ukraine, that they're going to force a mediocre peace deal, something that gives Russia a bunch of Ukrainian territory and ends up rubber stamping all big countries in the world who have designs on their weaker neighbors' territory, right? It's also going to create a situation where Putin now has a gigantic military and a war economy pivoted entirely to military operations. And what do you do when you have a war economy? You can only do one thing with it. Invade, right? So Zelensky also warned correctly that even though every Russian advance does strengthen Russia's bargaining power, that Putin can leverage when peace negotiations or a ceasefire begin, right? Putin's said explicitly, he's told the Russian people this, the Russian forces are going to continue gradual creeping advances indefinitely, stopping Ukraine from conducting counteroffensives and fight a war of attrition against the Ukrainians. Russian military command is prioritizing offensive operations, right? Continuous, nonstop offensive operations that make gradual tactical gains over kind of large scale, like tactical maneuver, big operational attack, surge, push. Russians don't care. advance a couple yards of dirt at a time at a tremendous cost, and take out some Ukrainians while you're at it. Now, Putin has done the math, undoubtedly. Russia, the Kremlin is not stupid. We know they're mobilizing about 25,000 new people a day. Putin seems to believe this is indefinitely sustainable, and that therefore he will be able to sustain this kind of tactical operation for as long as he needs to, until the West wears out. And that's part of his operation too, guys. Don't kid yourselves. His goal is to put in Western leaders who are not going to support Ukraine. And that's right now, that looks like parties like Alternative for Germany, a little bit the French National Rally, but they still seem pretty pro-Ukrainian. Some American right-wing politicians, some of the American right understand that, Russia bad, North Korea's bestie. Lo and behold, they're not great people. So, that is part of the objective. That is a whole other front, is the political front. And just be aware when you see crazy stories or weird statements or short form content that sounds a little too salacious to be true. Just know that there's a country that's willing to kill 25,000 people a month is definitely going to also be committed to influencing your government to pull away from aiding Ukraine. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks to the Colonel tier members like Cameron Wheeler, William Tell, Eugenio Cuesta, and Makoto Mason, and Anon. Thanks to Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you guys. Really. I depend on you guys. And be sure to check the new video drop and peep the new site. Link is in the description. See you in the next one. Cheers.